traded air attacks along the Black Sea coast early today, just hours after their latest peace talks ended without progress in Istanbul. In Ukraine, Russian drones struck the port city of Odessa, injuring at least 4 people and damaging buildings in the historic center, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Meanwhile, in Russia, a woman was killed and another seriously injured after debris from a downed drone fell in the Adler district, just south of Sochi. Authorities also reported that a drone struck an oil depot in the nearby Sirius Federal District. Sochi airport operations were briefly suspended during this incident. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, how do you assess the political and economic risks posed by continuing targeting of critical infrastructure from both sides?
The political issue here is that the two sides are not able to reach an agreement yet on a ceasefire, despite multiple rounds, including this week, of bilateral negotiations. Now, domestically, we've seen some protests over the anti-corruption measures recently introduced by the Ukrainian government, which the public did not like. So clearly, President Zelensky is under some domestic pressure. Of course, President Putin doesn't really worry about that because he basically arrests any domestic critics. So their domestic politics clearly differ between the two sides. Now, economically, it's clear that both sides are under pressure. Ukraine has to rely on foreign aid to support its economy. Russia is suffering from inflation. It's suffering from falling revenues as the price of oil falls, and the potential for significant U.S. sanctions on buyers of Russian energy, specifically India and China, which is something that the United States Congress and the President and President Trump have been looking at. So both countries still certainly face significant economic risks or worsening economic risks from the ongoing war. And that could be one of the reasons why they've agreed to multiple rounds of negotiations, even though the outcome of the negotiation meetings has been very limited.
And you have also touched down on this, but we are seeing a notable increase in continuation of this war, and also the talks are continuing. So what are the potential risks of these actions stalling peace negotiation even further?
The interesting thing there is both sides are under pressure from the United States to engage in ceasefire talks and to reach an agreement. Maybe Ukraine is not feeling the same amount of pressure from its European partners that it's getting from the Trump administration. But clearly there's pressure from the Trump administration on Ukraine, despite President Trump's recent agreement to sell weapons to the Europeans who could then gift them to Ukraine, or despite Trump's recent criticism of Putin as well. But also, again, Russia is facing this very new and significant risk that the United States is going to impose very hefty sanctions or tariffs on India and China for buying Russian energy. So Russia is under pressure, just like Ukraine is under pressure from the United States for some kind of progress in the ceasefire talks, even though it hasn't happened yet.
And now, what are the political dynamics within both countries, as well as their relations with external actors like NATO and the EU, as they continue their barrage of drones against each other and also talks at the same time?
Well, domestically in Ukraine, President Zelensky has this new issue with public dislike for some of the changes he's made to the legal infrastructure governing corruption investigations, and that's why there was public protests in recent days. And those were really the first public protests against Zelensky since the war began over 3 years ago. Zelensky's also facing pressure from manpower issues and the increasing need to draft ever younger men into the military. And that's a significant risk for Ukraine and for the domestic politics of Ukraine. In Russia, again, Putin doesn't really worry about criticism because he arrests his critics, but he does have this issue, a similar issue with regard to manpower. The losses that Russia has experienced on the battlefield, both in dead and injured, is is extraordinary, and he needs to find ways to replace that manpower. So there is some domestic political pressure because of that Putin has to deal with, and that might be one incentive for Russia to reach an agreement in the ceasefire talks.
Do you think there can be another round of talks according to your assessment or maybe your predictions?
I think there will be. Again, both sides, both Ukraine and Russia, are under pressure from the United States, and I think that kind of pressure can have its effect. And there's been repeated willingness from Ukraine to engage in these talks, and it seems that they're open to doing it anytime, and regardless of the result or the lack of results in the previous round. Russia seems to have been very reluctant, but again, there's this new incentive for Russia to engage in these talks because of the 50-day deadline imposed by President Trump and this potential higher tariff on the two main customers for Russian energy, India and China. So both sides are incentivized to, and I would say that we should expect more rounds. And then there's this recent proposal from President Zelensky to have a four-way talk with the participation of Zelensky, President Erdogan of Turkey, as well as President Trump of the United States. We haven't really seen a formal response to that from the other three countries that he's proposed join these talks, but that's definitely something to watch in the coming days.
Yes, thank you very much, Ross Feingold, for joining us today and sharing your insight as a political analyst. Now we move on to our next news.